The dust-laden wind swept across the barren Arizona territory as Penelope Barrett clutched her shawl tighter around her trembling shoulders, tears streaming down her dirt-smudged face. The year was 1876, and in the small settlement of Old Tucson, her life had just crumbled to pieces as surely as the dry earth beneath her worn boots. "You have until sundown to gather your things and leave," Reverend Whitmore had declared, his voice carrying across the stunned congregation. "We cannot abide such sin in our midst. A woman with child and no husband, you bring shame upon us all." No one had risen to defend her, not even her own father, who sat stiff-backed in the third pew, his eyes fixed on the floor. The father of her unborn child had abandoned her weeks ago, riding out with a cattle drive and promising to return with enough money to start a life together. A letter had arrived yesterday. Instead, he'd found another woman in Santa Fe and wouldn't be coming back. Penelope stumbled along the outskirts of town, one hand pressed against her still flat stomach. Where would she go? What would she do? At 22, she had never ventured more than 10 miles from Old Tucson. The nearest town was 2 days' ride, and she had no horse, little money, and the growing awareness of the tiny life dependent on her. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her shrink against a scrubby mesquite tree. A lone rider approached, silhouetted against the setting sun. As he drew nearer, Penelope recognized Thomas Kincaid, whose small ranch lay several miles outside town. He wasn't much older than her, perhaps 26, but carried himself with the weathered confidence of a man who had seen much in his years. Thomas reined his horse to a stop, dust swirling around them both. "Miss Barrett, what in heaven's name are you doing out here all alone?" Penelope couldn't hold back her tears as she explained what had happened at the church that morning. Thomas's face darkened as he listened, his jaw tightening beneath the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat. "They banished you for carrying a child?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. Then, after a moment's contemplation, Thomas extended his hand. "Then we'll raise it in light." Penelope stared up at him in confusion. "Mr. Kincaid, I don't understand." "My mother was cast out much the same way," he explained, his blue eyes softening. "She died bringing me into this world, alone and afraid. I won't let that happen to you or your baby." He gestured to his hand again. "My ranch ain't much, but it's shelter, and it's far enough from town that folks won't bother you. You can stay as my guest until you figure out what to do next." Penelope hesitated. She barely knew Thomas Kincaid, having exchanged no more than pleasantries at the general store or church socials. Yet there was something in his eyes, a steadiness, a genuineness that calmed her racing heart. "People will talk," she warned, even as she reached for his hand. Thomas helped her onto his horse, settling her in front of him. "Let them," he replied, his voice a rumble against her back. "I've never much cared what the good people of Old Tucson think." As they rode away from town, Penelope felt a strange mixture of fear and hope. Behind her lay everything familiar: her father's house, the schoolroom where she had taught until this morning, the life she had always known. Ahead lay uncertainty, but also, perhaps, salvation. Thomas's ranch was modest, a small cabin with a sturdy barn and corral, a chicken coop, and a vegetable garden that had seen better days. A stream ran along the eastern edge of the property, and pine-covered mountains rose in the distance. It wasn't grand, but as Thomas helped her down from the horse, Penelope could see it was a place built with care. "It ain't much," Thomas said, echoing her thoughts, "but it's peaceful here." "It's lovely," Penelope replied honestly. "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Kincaid." "I promise I won't impose for long." Thomas shook his head. "You can stay as long as you need, and it's just Thomas. Mr. Kincaid was my father, and I ain't him." That first night, Penelope slept in Thomas's bed while he took a bedroll by the fire. Despite her exhaustion, sleep came fitfully. Everything had changed so quickly: yesterday, a respectable teacher. Today, a disgraced woman dependent on the charity of a near stranger. Dawn broke with the crowing of roosters and the smell of coffee. Penelope found Thomas already dressed and cooking breakfast, his movements efficient in the small kitchen space. "Hope you're hungry," he said, sliding eggs onto a plate. "Got some biscuits warming too." "I can help," Penelope offered, suddenly aware of her disheveled appearance. "I'm not used to being waited on." Thomas glanced at her, a half-smile tugging at his mouth. Figured you could use the rest, but I won't turn down help. Ranch is too much work for one person anyhow. Over the next few days, they established a cautious routine. Thomas tended the livestock and worked the land while Penelope took over the household tasks cooking, cleaning, mending clothes that had clearly gone too long without attention. They spoke little at first, both wary of overstepping invisible boundaries. On the fourth day, as Penelope hung laundry in the yard, a wagon approached. She tensed, one of Thomas's shirts clutched in her hands. Had someone from town come to drive her away from this refuge too? To her relief, the visitor was an older woman with iron gray hair and kind eyes. "So it's true," the woman said, climbing down from her wagon. "Thomas has himself a house guest. I'm Martha Wilson. My husband and I have the next ranch over." "Penelope Barrett," she replied, uncertain how much this neighbor knew about her situation. Martha's smile was warm. "Thomas rode over yesterday, asked if I had any things a woman might need. Wasn't hard to figure out the rest." She reached into her wagon and pulled out a bundle. "Brought you some clothes that might fit better as time goes on and some yarn if you knit. Baby will need blankets." Penelope felt tears well up. You don't think I'm? Honey, I've lived too long to judge anyone. Life's hard enough out here without adding to each other's burdens." Martha patted her hand. "Besides, Thomas Kincaid doesn't often reach out for help. If he thinks you're worth standing up for, that's good enough for me." After Martha left, Penelope found Thomas in the barn, brushing down his horse. "Your neighbor, Mrs. Wilson, came by," she said. He nodded without looking up. "Martha's good people, her husband Frank too. She brought things for me, for the baby." Penelope hesitated. "Thomas, why are you doing this? You barely know me." His hand stilled on the brush. "When my ma died, a stranger took me in, raised me as his own, said it was the right thing to do." He finally met her eyes. "Guess I'm just passing that kindness along." As summer gave way to fall, Penelope's body changed, her condition becoming impossible to hide. Thomas expanded his trips to neighboring towns for supplies, avoiding Old Tucson to spare her the gossip. They settled into a comfortable partnership, the initial awkwardness giving way to genuine companionship. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains, Thomas cleared his throat. "Been thinking," he said, his eyes on the distant horizon. "Baby needs a name on paper. Proper like?" Penelope's hand rested on her rounded belly. "I've been considering names, though I won't know if it's a boy or girl until—" "That's not what I meant," Thomas interrupted gently. "I meant my name. Your baby could have my name." Penelope stared at him. "Thomas, are you proposing marriage to me?" He shifted uncomfortably, finally meeting her gaze. "Wouldn't be a real marriage, just on paper to protect the child. And you, when the baby comes, you'll both have a name that means something around these parts. My father wasn't much, but the Kincaid name still carries weight." The offer stunned her, a marriage of convenience, a sacrifice made for her protection. "I can't ask that of you," she whispered. "You deserve a chance at real love, a real family." "Ain't asking for anything in return," Thomas said firmly. "Just offering a solution to a problem." That night, Penelope lay awake thinking about Thomas's proposal. In the months she'd lived at his ranch, she'd come to know him as a man of few words but deep principles. He worked from sunrise to sunset, never complained, and had shown her nothing but respect. There were worse fates than being tied to such a man. Even in name only, in the morning, she found him splitting wood, his shirt clinging to his back with sweat despite the crisp fall air. "Yes," she said simply. Thomas paused mid-swing. Yes, I'll marry you, for the baby's sake." 3 days later, they rode to a small church in a neighboring town where no one knew their story. The ceremony was brief, with only Martha and Frank Wilson as witnesses. Penelope wore a dress Martha had altered for her, with wildflowers in her hair. Thomas had shaved and wore his only good shirt, looking almost boyish in his nervousness. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Thomas hesitated before placing the gentlest of kisses on her cheek. It was a marriage on paper only, just as he'd promised, but as they rode home together, now truly home for Penelope, she felt a shift in her feelings toward this quiet, honorable man. Winter came early that year, with biting winds and occasional snow. Thomas added a room to the cabin, working through the cold to provide a nursery for the coming child. At night, they still maintained their separate sleeping arrangements, but their conversations grew longer, deeper. Penelope learned about Thomas's childhood with his adoptive father, a silver prospector who'd found more wisdom than riches in his long life. Thomas heard about Penelope's dreams of someday running her own school, of teaching children to see beyond the boundaries of their small town. "You still could," Thomas said one evening as they sat by the fire. "Teach, I mean, might not be in a proper schoolhouse, but plenty of ranching families around here with children who need learning." Penelope smiled, warming to the idea. "Perhaps when the baby is older, I'd like that." As her time grew nearer, Martha Wilson visited more frequently, bringing supplies and practical advice. "First babies can be stubborn about coming," she warned, "and sometimes quick as lightning. Best be prepared for either." Thomas became increasingly protective, limiting Penelope's chores and watching her like a hawk. His concern touched her deeply, especially knowing it wasn't just duty driving his actions anymore. Something had grown between them, unspoken but undeniable. On a frigid January night, Penelope woke to a sharp pain that took her breath away. She called out for Thomas, who appeared instantly at her side, looking both terrified and determined. "It's time," she gasped as another contraction seized her. Thomas was already pulling on his boots. "I'll fetch Martha." "There's no time," Penelope cried, clutching his hand. "The baby's coming now." What followed was the longest, most painful night of Penelope's life. Thomas proved surprisingly capable, following her instructions and offering steady support. Just before dawn, their daughter entered the world with a lusty cry that filled the cabin. "She's beautiful," Thomas whispered, his voice thick with emotion as he placed the swaddled infant in Penelope's arms. "Perfect." Penelope looked down at the tiny face, then up at Thomas. "She needs a name." "Your choice," he said, gently touching the baby's cheek with one calloused finger. "Hope," Penelope decided. "Hope Kincaid." Thomas's eyes met hers, and in that moment, something passed between them, an understanding, a possibility. "Hope," he repeated, the word carrying weight beyond the child's name. Martha arrived later that morning, praising Thomas's handling of the birth and helping Penelope settle into motherhood. News traveled fast in the territory, and soon gifts began arriving from neighboring ranches: handmade blankets, preserved fruits, even a finely crafted wooden cradle from Frank Wilson. Nothing came from old Tucson or Penelope's father. Winter slowly released its grip on the land. Hope grew stronger daily, her eyes turning a clear blue like Thomas's, though her hair promised to be dark like Penelope's. Thomas doted on the baby, often carrying her around the ranch tucked in one arm while he worked. Penelope watched them together one spring morning, Thomas pointing out chickens and horses to the attentive infant, and realized with startling clarity that she had fallen in love with her husband. It hadn't happened suddenly, but gradually, built on a foundation of respect, gratitude, and shared purpose. The realization frightened her. Their arrangement had been clear: a marriage on paper for the baby's sake. Thomas had never indicated he wanted more, and Penelope feared destroying the comfortable partnership they'd built. As spring blossomed into summer, visitors became more frequent. Martha introduced them to other families in the area, and soon the once quiet ranch often hosted Sunday gatherings. Penelope began teaching reading and arithmetic to several neighboring children twice weekly, with Hope napping in her cradle nearby. Thomas expanded the vegetable garden and added more livestock. The ranch prospered under their joint care, becoming a true home rather than just a shelter. Yet still, they maintained their separate spaces, connected by everything except the final intimacy of marriage. One hot July afternoon, an unexpected visitor arrived. Penelope was alone with Hope, Thomas having ridden out to help a neighbor with a broken fence. She recognized the horse first, her father's old mare, and froze on the porch, Hope balanced on her hip. Samuel Barrett dismounted slowly, looking older and grayer than when she'd last seen him a year before. He approached hesitantly, hat in hand. "Penelope," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I've come to see you, and—" His eyes fixed on Hope. "Her name is Hope," Penelope said stiffly. "Your granddaughter." Samuel nodded, tears gathering in his eyes. "She's beautiful. May I come closer?" Penelope wanted to refuse, to send him away as he had done to her. But something in his broken expression stopped her. "Why now, father, after all this time?" "Pride," he answered simply. "Foolish, damnable pride. I listened to Reverend Whitmore instead of my own heart. By the time I realized my mistake, you were gone." Took me months to find out where you'd settled." He swallowed hard. "Can you ever forgive me?" Before Penelope could answer, the sound of galloping hooves announced Thomas's return. He rode hard into the yard, dismounting in one fluid motion and placing himself between Penelope and her father. "Mr. Barrett," he said coldly, "what brings you to our home?" Samuel Barrett straightened, meeting Thomas's gaze directly. "I've come to make amends to my daughter and meet my granddaughter, if she'll allow it." Thomas looked to Penelope, making it clear the decision was hers alone. She appreciated his protection, but also recognized the cost of prolonging bitterness. "Come inside, father," she finally said. "Meet Hope properly, and my husband." The reunion was awkward at first, but as Samuel held Hope and tearfully apologized again, the ice between them began to thaw. He stayed for supper, telling Penelope that her mother had never agreed with her banishment and had been sending letters trying to find her. "She'll want to visit if you'll permit it," Samuel said. "She misses you terribly." After he left, promising to return with Penelope's mother, Thomas and Penelope sat in silence on the porch. Hope slept peacefully in her cradle beside them. "You didn't have to forgive him," Thomas finally said. "Would have understood if you sent him packing." Penelope reached for his hand, an intimacy they rarely shared outside of necessity. Life's too short for holding grudges, and Hope deserves to know her family, all of her family. Thomas looked at their joined hands, then at her face in the fading light. "You're an extraordinary woman, Penelope Kincaid." Something in his tone made her heart quicken. "Thomas," she began hesitantly, "are you happy with our arrangement, with things as they are between us?" He tensed slightly but didn't withdraw his hand. "Are you unhappy?" "That's not what I asked." Gathering her courage, she continued, "When we married, it was for Hope to give her a name, protection, but now—" "Now," Thomas prompted when she faltered, "now I find myself wishing it was more than just an arrangement." The words rushed out before she could lose her nerve. "I care for you, Thomas, more than I expected to, more than just gratitude or friendship." Thomas was silent for so long that Penelope began to regret her confession, but when she tried to pull her hand away, he tightened his grip gently. "Been afraid to say anything," he admitted gruffly. "Didn't want you feeling obligated. You came here needing shelter, not a husband in truth." Hope stirred in her cradle, momentarily distracting them both. When she settled again, Thomas turned to face Penelope fully. "I love that little girl like she was my own flesh and blood," he said earnestly. "And I've been falling in love with her mother since the day you hung my shirts on the line and rearranged my kitchen." The confession, so simply stated, filled Penelope with joy. "So where does that leave us?" In answer, Thomas leaned forward and kissed her, not the polite peck from their wedding day, but a real kiss, tender and questioning. When they broke apart, both were smiling. "Reckon it leaves us as a proper family," he said, "if that's what you want." That night, for the first time, they shared the bedroom that had been only Thomas's in name. Their coming together was sweet and unhurried, the culmination of feelings that had grown naturally over their year together. As summer turned to fall again, Penelope's mother came to visit, bringing reconciliation and a renewed relationship. The ranch continued to prosper, and Thomas and Penelope's love deepened with each passing day. On Hope's first birthday, they hosted a gathering for all the neighboring families. As twilight fell and lanterns were lit, Thomas took Penelope aside, away from the celebration. "Got something to ask you," he said, suddenly nervous. "Been thinking about it for a while." "What is it?" Penelope asked, concerned by his serious tone. Thomas took a deep breath. "When we married, it wasn't real just words said for protection. I was thinking maybe now that things have changed between us." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small gold ring. "Maybe we could say those words again, meaning them this time, a real wedding with a proper honeymoon after." Tears filled Penelope's eyes as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'd like that very much." They renewed their vows 2 weeks later, with Hope toddling between them, clutching her mother's skirts. This time, when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Thomas's kiss was neither hesitant nor brief, drawing good-natured cheers from their assembled friends and family. Later that night, after Hope was asleep and they were alone, Penelope nestled against Thomas's chest. "Did you ever imagine, that day you found me on the road, that we'd end up here?" Thomas stroked her hair thoughtfully. "Not exactly. Just knew I couldn't leave you there, couldn't let you face it alone." "Then we'll raise it in light," Penelope quoted his words from that fateful day. "You kept your promise." "And I'll keep making that same promise every day," Thomas replied, his arms tightening around her, "to you and to Hope, and to whoever else might join our family someday." Penelope smiled at that. She was already suspecting another child might be on the way, though she hadn't confirmed it yet. From rejection and despair had come love and family, stronger perhaps because of the difficult path that had brought them together. Outside, the desert night bloomed with stars, and inside their small cabin, hope continued to grow. 5 years passed, bringing changes to the Kincaid ranch and family. Hope grew into a spirited, bright-eyed child with her mother's quick mind and her father's steady determination. She was joined by a brother, Samuel Thomas, named for both grandfathers, and later by twin girls, Martha and Grace. The ranch expanded as the family did. Thomas added rooms to the cabin until it became a proper house, with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. The livestock multiplied, the fields yielded better harvests each year, and the Kincaid name became known throughout the territory for fair dealings and quality produce. Penelope's small teaching arrangement grew into a proper school, housed in a building Thomas and the neighboring men raised in a week of concentrated effort. Children from miles around came to learn reading, writing, mathematics, and history from Mrs. Kincaid, while their mothers often stayed to exchange recipes and news. Old Tucson changed too. Reverend Whitmore moved on to another parish, replaced by a younger minister with more compassionate views. The railroad came through, bringing new faces and ideas. When Penelope occasionally ventured into town with her family, the stares and whispers had long since faded. On Hope's 6th birthday, Thomas surprised them all with a trip to Tucson. The children were excited by the prospect of seeing the larger settlement, while Penelope felt a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. It would be her first extended visit since her banishment years before. They arrived on a busy Saturday, the streets crowded with wagons and riders. Thomas guided their wagon to a small hotel where he'd reserved rooms, then helped his family down. Hope held her mother's hand tightly, wide-eyed at the bustling activity. "It's so noisy," she observed. "Do people really live with all this commotion, Mama?" Penelope smiled, seeing the town through her daughter's eyes. "They get used to it, just as we're used to the sounds of our ranch." After settling in, they walked to the main street for lunch. Penelope kept her head high, though her heart pounded at each familiar face. Some nodded politely, others looked away. A few stopped to greet them warmly, particularly those who had business dealings with Thomas. Outside the restaurant, they encountered Mrs. Henderson, once Penelope's closest friend in town. She hesitated before approaching, eyes taking in the beautiful family before her. "Penelope," she said hesitantly, "you look well, very well indeed." "Thank you, Eleanor," Penelope replied evenly. "As do you. May I introduce my husband, Thomas, and our children Hope, Samuel, Martha, and Grace?" Eleanor bent slightly to address Hope. "What a pretty girl you are, and how old are you today?" 6, Hope answered proudly. "Papa brought us to town for my birthday. A special occasion indeed." Eleanor straightened, her expression softening. "Penelope, I've often thought of you over the years." "Many of us have. We were wrong. What happened wasn't right." The simple acknowledgement after so long brought unexpected tears to Penelope's eyes. Thomas's hand found the small of her back, a silent support. "Thank you for saying so," Penelope managed. "It means more than you know." Eleanor glanced at the children, then back to Penelope. "There's a gathering at the church tomorrow after services, a social. Many would be pleased if your family attended." Thomas looked to Penelope, leaving the decision entirely to her. After a moment's consideration, she nodded. "We'd be honored." That night, as the children slept in the adjoining hotel room, Penelope sat at the window looking out at the town lights. "Having regrets?" Thomas asked softly, coming to stand behind her. She reached back to take his hand. "No, never that. Just thinking about how life circles around. 6 years ago, I was cast out of this place in shame. Tomorrow we'll walk into the same church as a family." "We don't have to go," he reminded her. "Say the word and we'll head home instead." Penelope turned to face him. "No, I want to go." Not for their approval, I stopped needing that long ago, but for closure, perhaps, and for hope to see where her journey began. The next morning, they dressed in their Sunday best. Hope wore a new dress made specially for the occasion, her dark hair tied back with blue ribbons that matched her eyes. Thomas looked uncommonly formal in a suit coat, tugging occasionally at the collar as if it might strangle him. The little church was as Penelope remembered, white clapboard with a modest steeple. She paused at the steps, memories washing over her. Thomas squeezed her hand gently and Hope looked up questioningly. "Is something wrong, Mama?" she asked. Penelope shook her head, smiling down at her firstborn. "No, sweetheart, just remembering." Inside, heads turned as they entered. Penelope recognized many faces, though some showed the passage of years more than others. Her father and mother were already seated near the front and waved them over. The service passed in a blur, the minister's words about forgiveness and community seeming particularly pointed. Afterward, as the congregation moved to the social hall for refreshments, Penelope found herself surrounded by former neighbors, many expressing regret for past actions. "We should have stood by you," Mrs. Taylor, the baker's wife, said tearfully. "My herald said as much at the time, but we were all so afraid of being judged ourselves." "The past is past," Penelope replied graciously. "We've all moved forward." Across the room, she noticed Thomas deep in conversation with several ranchers, likely discussing cattle prices or water rights. The children played with others their age, quickly overcoming initial shyness. It was, in many ways, a healing moment, not erasing the past, but putting it properly in perspective. As they prepared to leave, the minister approached. "Mrs. Kincaid, I understand you run a school near your ranch." Penelope nodded. "Just a small one for the children of neighboring families." "I've heard remarkable things about your teaching," he said. "We're in need of someone to take over our Sunday school program. The position doesn't pay much, but it would be a service to the community." "Would you consider it, perhaps once a month when you're in town visiting your parents?" The offer surprised her. "I'm not sure the town would accept me in such a role, given my history." The minister smiled kindly. "Times change, Mrs. Kincaid, people change. Your family is living proof of that." On the ride home the next day, with the children drowsy from excitement and too many sweets, Thomas asked what she thought about the minister's offer. "It's tempting," she admitted. "Teaching has always been my calling, and it would be good for the children to know their grandparents better." "Then do it," Thomas encouraged. "We could make a monthly trip. Frank and Martha would watch the ranch." Penelope studied her husband's profile as he guided the wagon. "You've given me so much, Thomas. A home when I had none, your name when I needed protection, love when I least expected it." He glanced at her, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "Seems to me I got the better end of that bargain. 4 beautiful children and the finest woman in the territory." Hope, not as asleep as they'd thought, piped up from the back of the wagon. "Tell the story again, Papa, about how you found Mama." Thomas chuckled. "Again, you've heard it 100 times. Please," the little girl pleaded. "It's my favorite." Thomas winked at Penelope, then began the tale they'd carefully crafted for young ears. "Well, one hot afternoon, I was riding home from town when I saw the prettiest lady I'd ever laid eyes on, looking like she needed a friend." Penelope listened, marveling at how their difficult beginning had transformed into a beloved family legend. Thomas's version emphasized courage and kindness, leaving out the harsher realities of judgment and rejection. Someday Hope would be old enough for the full truth, but for now she deserved the beautiful version, a story of love overcoming obstacles. As they crested the final hill and their ranch came into view, Penelope felt a surge of gratitude. What had once been just Thomas's small cabin was now a thriving homestead, trees planted and growing tall, fields green with crops, livestock grazing peacefully. Their home. "Look, Mama." Hope pointed excitedly. "I can see our house." "Yes," Penelope agreed softly, "our home." Thomas reached for her hand across the wagon seat. "Not bad for a marriage that started as just words on paper, is it?" Penelope squeezed his fingers. "Not bad at all, Mr. Kincaid." That evening, with the children tucked into bed and the house quiet, Thomas and Penelope sat on their porch swing, watching the stars emerge. The familiar ritual never lost its magic, this peaceful moment together at day's end. "I've been thinking," Thomas said, his arm around her shoulders. "Hope's getting old enough to start learning the business side of ranching. She's got a good head for numbers, like her mother." "She does," Penelope agreed. "Though I think she might have other ideas. She asked me yesterday if girls could be doctors." Thomas laughed softly. "Wouldn't put it past her to be the first woman doctor in the territory. She's got determination enough." Whatever she chooses, she'll have what I didn't, the freedom to follow her heart without judgment. Penelope leaned her head against his shoulder. All our children will. That's the legacy worth building, Thomas agreed. More valuable than land or cattle. As the moon rose over their little corner of the Arizona territory, Penelope reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From the darkest moment of her life had come unexpected joy, a true partner, beloved children, meaningful work, and a home built on love rather than convention. I love you, Thomas Kincaid, she said simply, more with each passing day. He kissed her gently, his calloused hand cradling her face. And I love you, Mrs. Kincaid. From now until the stars burn out. Inside the house, Hope dreamed of birthday celebrations and new friends. Samuel clutched his wooden horse, and the twins slept peacefully side by side. Outside, the desert night embraced the ranch with its vast canopy of stars, a constant reminder of possibilities as boundless as the western sky. And so life continued on the Kincaid Ranch, not always easy, not always perfect, but always facing toward the light. Just as Thomas had promised on that fateful day when he found a frightened young woman on a dusty road and offered not just shelter but a future. Then we'll raise it in light, he had said, and they had, together.